for being with us today. To our dear audience, please feel free to bring up questions in the chat, and we will try to convey them at the end of the discussion. So let's go for it and start the first intervention, if you allow me. Helga, what were the main findings of the report about the evolution of public procurement in the 10 years from the 2011-2021?
Thank you very much, Gracia. I will start maybe summarizing the main results we have published, the report you mentioned already. We are concluding that it has been a lost decade for competition. Our analysis shows that the level of competition for public tender has gone down over the last 10 years. To put it very simple, competition has shrunk. The multiple challenges and crises that countries are facing, we simply cannot afford to lose another decade. Making public procurement more attractive for companies and fostering competition is crucial to get best value for public money and create opportunities for companies to come into business with public authorities. We are speaking about 2 trillion public money spent each year by public authorities, worth approximately 14% of the GDP of the 27 member states combined. What are our main findings in a nutshell? The trend for competition indicator was unsatisfactory in most member states. Single bidding, the main competition indicator, nearly doubled. This means that the number of procedures where there was only one bidder almost increased by 100% in 10 years. It reached a peak in 2021 when for 42% of all orders in Europe, only one company submitted a bid. At the same time, the number of companies submitting tenders almost halved, from around 6 to 3 per procedure. And too many contracts were awarded directly. We are talking about authorities directly approaching one or several companies without issuing public tenders at all. Such direct awards should be the exception. In fact, they were much more generously used. 16% of the contracts above the EU threshold were awarded directly in 2021. 23 of 27 member states lie above the 10% red flag of the Commission. These 3 indicators show that competition has faded away in the last decade. At the same time, cross-border contracts awards remained low. This raises doubt about the effectiveness of the European single market. And let me highlight that we identify significant differences between the member states, regions, and economic sectors. A clear signal that contracting authorities take diverse approaches to their procurement practices. Coming to the second main conclusion. You may know that in 2014, as already mentioned by Garcia, the EU launched a reform of the public procurement. The main goal was to make public procurement simpler, easier, more attractive for small companies, and to use public procurement for strategic political goals. We assessed in this audit the impact of the reform, whether it was a success. Unfortunately, the various goals were not yet achieved. The reform has not led to any significant improvements to make public procurement more attractive. Both bidders and contracting authorities still perceive the process cumbersome and the administrative burden high. The impact of digitalization initiative as the single procurement document or e-form has yet to be seen. The red tape was not cut. On the contrary, the average duration of the procedure has even increased by 50% since 2011, from 63 days to 96 in 2021. And the share of SME contract has not increased overall. Strategic procurement, the promotion of green, social, and innovative public procurement had a limited impact at best. Contracts awarded are still the ones with the lowest bid. And to come to the least to the last, sorry, but maybe most important point. Both Commission and Member States are fully focusing on compliance and not on performance, and therefore not on competition. Complying with the rules, avoiding legal challenges, the timely transposition of the directive into national law, and the correct application of the rules were at the center of attention, but not performance and competition. We found only little awareness on the problem and no systematic approach to address it. Since December 23, we are facing a lot of feedback and huge interest on our report. The results are perceived as a warmly welcome wake-up call, and there is one common message: yes, something needs to be changed, and that's why we are happy to be here today and discuss with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Elga. This is for sure a wake-up call. And we are very awake now to also listen what the Commission recorded for us to the question, in general terms, what is your opinion of the findings of the report? So we will play video 1 now.
I think the Court of Auditors report is both interesting and timely, because limited competition in the EU procurement market is a concern also for the Commission. The expectations were high when our public procurement directives were reformed in 2014. The new framework should improve transparency, fight corruption and nepotism, make participation of SMEs easier, and increase competition for the good of higher quality and lower prices. But as the ECA's report demonstrates, that didn't quite go to plan. No one could have foreseen the stress our economies would encounter through the pandemic, the invasion of Ukraine, energy price hikes and inflation. So the obstacles for the full effect of the procurement directives are many. Limited public resources, many different priorities, and increased challenges at the geopolitical level. And this has led to the perhaps most significant change, an increasing use of procurement as a strategic tool to achieve wider common goals, but also to a fragmentation of the legal framework, which is also noted by the court. Against this background, I think I can say that we, the Commission and ECA, share a common objective, which is to improve the performance and the impact of public procurement in the EU. The Court's report contains several useful recommendations in this respect, which the Commission agrees with and is, in fact, implementing already.
The Commission makes a reference now to an agreement with the recommendations of the European Court of Auditors. Let me drive now the question to Friedemann, if you allow me. Could you explain briefly what were the recommendations made to tackle the different issues you identified in your report?
Thank you very much, Grazia. Yes, of course, with pleasure. In total, we issued a number of 4 recommendations, and it's good to know that the Commission accepted all of them, which I think is a sign or demonstrates also the good cooperation that we had across the audit. So recommendation 1 is on the clarification and prioritization of public procurement objectives. And we asked the Commission to initiate a process in order to formulate and prioritize fewer but clearer and more measurable objectives, such as simplification, transparency, SME participation, or strategic procurements. And B, to reflect whether EU strategic policy objectives should be achieved by means of strategic requirements for public procurement procedures, or rather by further regulation of the specifications of works, goods, and services themselves. And we gave the Commission a target implementation date of mid-2025 for that. The second recommendation is on data, and we asked the Commission to address shortcomings of public procurement data. In detail, the Commission should A, further improve the reliability and completeness of TED data, notably by promoting the use of optional input fields and embedded controls at data entry. B, collect additional relevant monitoring data from complementary sources, such as the public procurement data space, to feed monitoring indicators. And we are particularly keen in pushing through the existence of unique identifiers for suppliers, beneficial owners, and contracting authorities in order to improve monitoring. C, We asked the Commission to use the public procurement data space to monitor the quality of the data provided through e-forms and other published data in TED. And D, we asked the Commission to require member states in their monitoring reports on public procurement to provide complete and accurate data in a consistent manner. The target implementation date for that is end of 2025. Recommendation number 3 is on the Commission's monitoring tools as regards competition in public procurement. We asked the Commission to align the scoreboard scope with the objectives in the directives, in particular by including additional indicators, e.g. for example, relating to cross-border and strategic procurement. Furthermore, to show the multi-annual trends in competition in public procurement at EU, member state, and regional level. C, to disclose its indicator definitions and calculation methods in a timely manner. D, to introduce advanced reporting features allowing further exploitation of public procurement data. E, disclose information on appeal procedures launched by unsuccessful bidders. F, include information in its reporting on competition in member states, regions, and economic sectors based on key performance indicators. And G, explore new ways of monitoring public procurement prices in EU and member states, something that did not yet exist when we carried out our audit. The target implementation for that is end of 2024. And finally, we have recommendation number 4, which is on a further deepening of the root cause analysis, the analysis of root causes underlying limited competition in public procurement, and the implementation of measures to overcome key obstacles to competition and to promote best practice. So in detail, we asked the Commission to, based on the results of our audit and in cooperation with the member states, analyze in greater depth the root causes of weak competition in public procurement at EU, national, and regional level. And we asked the Commission, depending on the outcome of this analysis, to put forward measures to overcome the main obstacles to competition in public procurement, addressing contracting authorities' key concerns that we identified in the course of our audits, which are unnecessary administrative burdens, the development of efficient procedures, particularly as regards selection and award criteria is important. It is important to strengthen administrative capacity, to foster exchanges of best practices, to facilitate cross-border procurement, and to make public contracts more attractive to companies in general and in particular for SMEs. And we say that this could take the form of an EU-wide action plan. The target implementation date for that is end of 2025. So far as our recommendations are concerned, and I would like to stress again that we are very happy that the European Commission accepted all our recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Friedman. Allow me to play the video of the Commission, by the Commission, when we asked them about these recommendations. Do you consider that the recommendations made in the report are enough to tackle the shortcomings identified in that report? And Merete Clausen also gave us a video answering to this question. If we play then video number 2 now, please.
The recommendations are a good starting point to work on the issues identified, but they will not address all of them. The court mainly used 3 indicators in the analysis, namely single bids, direct awards, and the level of cross-border procurement. These indicators are all important for assessing the level of competition in public procurement. But effective competition in the public procurement markets is influenced by other factors as well. I already mentioned the administrative capacity of public buyers and their level of professionalization. And I also mentioned the current economic context, which is also important to explain the trends observed by the court. Over the past years, the EU economy has been hit with multiple crises and has faced the consequences of a rapidly changing economic landscape, fighting to avoid a low growth and low investment scenario. And the impact on public procurement markets and on competition has been significant. And the Commission is going to take all these factors into account in our discussions with Member States and other stakeholders, and we will reflect on actions to properly address them.
So we have gathered the opinion of the European Commission. We have the summary of the recommendations by the Court of Auditors. Allow me now to turn to the academia. I will start with a question to Albert. Do you consider that the recommendations made in the report will be enough to tackle the different shortcomings identified? What is your opinion on this report and its recommendations, please?
So, thank you for this, Gracia. I think the first thing to observe is that, in my view, it's not true that the European Commission has accepted the recommendations, whatever they say, because they say, we accept it, but this is outside of our powers. We accept it, but we cannot force it. There's something that is not mandatory. We accept it, but it depends on future legislative plans. So it's really not accepted. And I think we may fall into the trap of basically institutions being polite to each other and then believe that there's going to be anything meaningful coming through. I think the chances of this being implemented are slim to none. First, because the complexity of objectives in recommendation 1 is wanted. It's fully intentional and it's growing. There's a very clear commitment at the European Union and a member state level to use procurement for these strategic goals that also have now to do with digital industrial policy, with control of foreign subsidies, with access to procurement markets. And then we have the sustainability issues, the social value issues, the technological innovation issues. This is just growing, and reversing this trend by mid-2025, it's just completely unrealistic, especially if we bear in mind that there are going to be elections in the middle, and we may have a change of commission. So this is just not going to happen. On the data recommendations, everything that is recommended is in principle covered by the PPDS and what the European Commission is trying to put in place. But once you scratch a little bit beyond the surface, you realize that the PPDS is also not going to change anything, because PPDS is just a different format for the exact same information that is already collected in TED. And there is no indication whatsoever that the member states will go below thresholds in integrating their data infrastructures, or that they will comply with any of the voluntary e-forms fields. So a full implementation of PPDS, which is what the European Commission is pushing for and saying it's going to address some of these issues, will also not cover these issues. And then you look at the third recommendation on the monitoring of competition. Basically, this is just a criticism of the scoreboard. And it's also a strange position that the Court of Auditors has taken in saying the scoreboard is pretty useless. Most of its indicators and red flags are arbitrary because there's no description of the methodology, there's no justification for them. But then the same indicators and the same thresholds are used to criticize the situation in the member states. So it's hard to make sense of what is recommended and what should change. And then the fourth recommendation, to be honest, it's a little bit like wishing procurement was simpler, and wishing AI could figure it out, wishing we could spend more money in administrative capacity. These are things that are fundamentally outside the power of the European Commission, for as long as procurement is regulated through directives. These are all things that are for member states to do. They are not for the European Commission to do. Even if the Commission wanted to push for best practice, even if the Commission wanted to facilitate some of these issues at member state level, it depends on member states levels. And again, end of 2025, completely unrealistic. If you look at how long it took to reform the directives, it was only 3 years only to get the legislative package in place. It took another 4 to 5 years to have them fully implemented at member state level. Maybe now some of the things are starting to embed in practice. I think that the recommendations are both naive, too short terms for their implementation, and the reaction of the European Commission is, I'm not sure if I can say duplicitous, but it's just not genuine. Because they say that they accept everything without pointing out the things that cannot be delivered, things that are outside of the competence, things that they actually have no intention to implement. So I think the report is interesting in pointing out that there is an issue, that there's no clear commitment to competition, that there is no monitoring and data. I think that the problem identification in the report is correct, but I think that some of the claims that are made in the report, and particularly the way forward, would have required a bit of a further reconsideration, longer timescales, and something much more precise. But that's my view. I also understand it's easier to say it from the outside, but I think we have you know, we should be very careful to hope things are going to be better by the end of 2025 or even 2030.
Thank you, Albert. We knew this was not going to be a flat debate, that there are many different perspectives. We will give the floor to the court for their opinion if they want to say something about your comments, but allow me first to move to Pedro, because also Pedro expressed in your blog, telles.eu, a post about what are the results of this report. The new regulatory framework maybe might be needed for public procurement. You expressed your opinions, and I would appreciate if you share with us now your points of view. Thank you.
Sure, thank you very much. Well, my main comment about the report is that it's very thorough in the sense that it builds upon previous research in a way that was possibly not able, the previous researchers were not able to do, or previous reports were not able to do. It also has the benefit of not being commissioned by the European Commission, and as such, it's able to point that in some instances the emperor has no clothes. And that is very visible when you look at the report and look at, as Albert said, to the identification of the problems. So the report effectively confirms what was at least known by people that were doing some research in the field, that when it comes down to the job to be done that the directives have in terms of achieving a single market, because that's the legal basis for the procurement directives, they are not achieving that. So the competitive pressure, the competitive makeup in public procurement is degrading with every passing revision of the directives. So this is not, despite what the Commission is saying, this is not a problem from COVID, the war in Ukraine, and inflation. No, this is a trend that predates all those shocks by many, many years. So it's nothing new. It's just a continuation of that trend that is now more visible than it was in the past. So when the report says, or when Elga said at the beginning, that we have had a lost decade in terms of dealing with issues with competition in public procurement, this is absolutely correct. And we're going to lose at least another decade before we can turn it around, because as Albert is saying very well and very correctly, the fundamental issue we may have at this moment in time is that the legal framework that is in place is not the correct one to solve the underlying problem. And trying to solve the underlying competition or competitive nature problem of public procurement with the existing legal framework it's impossible to make it work. It's impossible to make it work. So, for example, if you look at all the work that the Commission is doing with the PPDS and improving data, that is a good first step, but by themselves, they will not change the reality. And the fact of the matter is, as Albert says very well, you have the mandatory parts of e-forms and also the PPDS that contract authorities will have to comply with, but the bits that are not mandatory, because they could never be mandatory because the legal framework from the directives do not allow them to make them mandatory. That is, the take-up is going to be low either at the member state level, or even if there is a policy decision at the member state level to take on those fields, then the actual compliance on a day-to-day basis is going to be very low because there's no advantage and there's no consequences either to actually go through that process of filling in those extra data fields. There's no win for the procurement officer at the end of the day to actually fill in those forms. On top of that, looking at the response of the Commission, both to the report and now with the 2 videos, I'm very concerned, and again, I agree with Albert to an extent that the Commission is effectively providing us with what we would call a non-answer answer. Something has to be said, something has to be written. So we're just going to write what we're doing, saying that we accept the results, and we're doing what we're doing. And that doesn't mean that actually what we're doing solves the results. In fact, solves the issues that are identified in the report. In fact, my opinion is what the Commission is proposing in the direction of travel, which is not only the fault of the Commission, that Albert also highlighted, in terms of adding more strategic objectives, adding more complexity in the procurement, it's actually going to lead to further problems down the line. So more competitive, more issues on the level of competitiveness in public procurement, because the more complexity you add into a system, less people can deal with it, less people can be competent doing it. So you're actually creating the conditions to facilitate the reduction in competitive pressure in public procurement markets. So that's why I said that we're probably looking not only at the previous lost decade, but we might be looking at a further lost decade, because this direction of travel is going to make things worse before people realize that we may have really to change direction to improve it.
Okay, thank you very much, Pedro. Would you like to add something, Helga, Friedemann, or we leave it for the end? Yeah, would you like to say something now? Okay.
Yes, thank you, Garcia, and thank you, Albert, and thank you, Pedro, for the first reflection. I'm auditor by my DNA, and auditor means always being quite critical, but I think auditor needs to look at the future as well, in particular if you do performance audit. And that's why I think if the identification of the problem is on the table, it's the first step. The second one starts then with the recommendation and with the follow-up of the recommendation and with the implementation date. And what I like in the process we can do as auditors at the European Court of Auditors to set the implementation date and to follow up on the implementation of the recommendation and to report to it, to the public, to report to it, to the European Parliament, and start another discussion. That's why I think ambitious implementation dates are keen, that nobody forgets the recommendation after the publication, but we have to follow up on that. And as I mentioned already in my introduction note, I think there was really a wake-up call with this report, and it was not an easy discussion for the Commission when we discussed the report at the European Parliament in the Cont Committee. There was a lot of clear articulated wish to change something, that really deeper change are needed. And I had the impression that Parliament is ready to do something. Of course, we have now the elections, but there was a clear political will at the Parliament level. The other side of the co-legislator coin at the European level is the member state, is the Council. Friedemann and I will present the results of the report to the Council on the 11th of March. We are already curious what will be discussed there, but I just can share the feedback so far we have received with you, that we are not only here today with you to exchange the report. I was already in several member states as well invited to present the report. They are really interested in that. The presidency has reached out to us already, the preparation of the council meeting, because competitiveness is now at the really one topic at the high agenda of the European Union, and so it's a timely report as well to discuss about competition. So I think sometimes the time frame, maybe Albert, is unrealistic short, but at least they need to start to do something. What I think a debate about the recommendation 1 is needed. Is it really the right goal to include something about procurement in every directive which is political on the agenda? I think that's one of problems which just make it more complex, make it more complicated for all the member states, the transposition and so on. So I think there is a discussion about this topic needed. The recommendation on data, yes, data is always a question, but as long as it is not mandatory, as Pedro mentioned, there is a problem with the data, and this has to be tackled and data has to be used, because I think the biggest reason for the wake-up call is that we are one of the first one who use the data available and just analyzed them and brought back the trend. And yes, fourth recommendation, I think as Court of Auditor, it's absolutely important to audit the Commission as main auditee, but to include member states, how they implemented it. And we have the recommendation addressed to the Commission as main auditee, but of course, this action plan and all the measures needs to be done with the member states together, because they are the one where the procurement procedures take place. And there is something which has to be done. But so far, direction I have seen personally, ensures me that there is a will to improve it. And yes, I'm happy when EIPA will invite us in 3 years and we can draw the conclusions 3 years later, what has been done and what has been improved. And I'm pretty sure we will not stand here with empty hands. But maybe we finalize here, or yes.
Okay. Thank you, Helga. There will be more opportunities, but let's go to the discussion we have had with Pedro as well regarding the legal framework. We made a question to the Commission as in this sense, in the light of the findings of the reports, some experts, academia, are talking about the need for a major regulatory overhaul to achieve the internal market of public procurement, and even the possibility perhaps of doing it in the form of regulations instead of directives. So we pose this question to Meret, and here is her answer. We play now video number 3.
I think we need to look very carefully at the root causes of limited competition in the EU procurement market, which is also what the court has concluded. What we can observe from the ongoing discussions with member states is that limited competition might not necessarily only be linked to the legislative framework. There are also issues with the functioning of our single market that need to be addressed, and with the administrative capacity and knowledge of the public procurement frameworks in the administrations. In other words, the public procurement directives, even if amended alone, cannot improve the situation on the markets. The Commission will therefore reflect on combined actions to help address the challenges. This could, of course, include legislative action, and we are analysing the current framework together with Member States and the European Parliament to be ready to propose necessary changes if the next Commission should decide to do so. In that context, we will also consider the type of legal instrument that can best address the issues that we have identified.
Would like to comment on it? I don't know, Albert, Pedro, would you like to comment on the words of the Commission on this?
Yeah, I mean, I really don't think these are issues that can be addressed through legislative change, unless you were to have a legislative change that was drastic in saying there is one and only one goal for public procurement, and this is value for money, which is somewhere in between the lines in some of the comments in the report. And I just don't see that happening. I'm not saying I would necessarily disagree with that, but it's just too far removed from what's happening. I think what the report identifies is for example, a reduction in the number of tenders, but we have not carried out a similar analysis of what has been the level of concentration in the market where these tenders have been reduced. Maybe there are less tenders because there are less companies, and then there's nothing you can change legislatively about it. There's also the issue of the technical capacity of the public administration. Lots of the issues why procurement is sometimes not attractive is not because the legislation is restrictive, it's just because the administrative practice is low, or the administrative practice is over risk averse. So for example, even if you could rely on ESPDs, you end up asking for the documentation where you don't need to, and things like this. So I really don't think legislative reform is the way forward. But also, and I understand the constraints of the Court of Auditors here, but you cannot look at procurement looking only at the 2014 directives, because there are loads of other legislative instruments that have an impact on procurement. So we have the foreign subsidies regulation, we have the international procurement instrument, we have now the corporate supply chain due diligence directive. All of these things have a massive direct effect on how procurement is conducted and on the paperwork around that. And I think sometimes what we forget is that having procurement that, for example, is commensurate with the general goals of the European Union and the rule of law is going to create complexity. Think about all of the additional conditionality on European funds that goes through public procurement in jurisdictions such as Hungary or Poland. That is important to protect the European Union. That is not making procurement simpler. That is not going to create competition because there's lots of other red tape. So I think we should also not fall into the trap of thinking that the directive is the be-all and end-all of the issues in procurement. And also, let's not forget, it's about 20% of procurement carried out at the member states that is covered by the directive. Everything else left to the national rules. So again, you know, it's a small part of the internal market, and the sort of obsession with cross-border, which is something that the European Commission has certainly been pushing for, is also not going to help us, because what we need to acknowledge is that the supply chains are very complicated and increasingly integrated in the internal market. It's very hard to say what is the result of the internal market and what's not, depending on where a tender is based. You would need to look through the whole supply chain. Is it worth doing? I don't know, but it's red tape and it's more information. So I think that there are issues, but legislative reform is not the way forward. Policy reform by the Commission is not necessarily the way forward, because as Pedro was saying earlier, this is all purely a matter of implementation. And then the capacity is also not only the one of the public buyers, but it's also from companies. We are, in scenarios of massive inflation, where the wages are not rising in the European Union, where people are not trained appropriately in the private sector. That also creates barriers to participate in procurement. So also looking only at the public side of things is not going to give us a full picture. So it's a very complicated issue. And I'm not sure that there is a silver bullet through legislative reform or simply through professionalizing public buyers, which is not that simple to do, because it has lots of parts to it. So I think that's a bit the false promise of the directive in 2014, that it said, we're going to do all of these things through the reform of the directives. We're going to simplify, we're going to make it greener, we're going to make it more socially responsible. And it hasn't happened. Why? Because these are systemic issues, and it's not about changing the rules. It's about many other things that need to happen at once.
Okay, thank you very much, Albert. So far, we have the glass perhaps half empty, half full. I hope to finish the debate also gathering some potential solutions, positive messages, but it's true that there is such a complicated field here that we are tackling today and discussing. I would like to go back now to the Commission, if you allow me, because we also ask what is the measures that we can expect from the institutions to implement the recommendations. So we are now discussing about, is it legal, is it policy? What is the opinion of the Commission on this? It's a very short video, number 4, that we will play now. And then
we in the Commission want to continue a reflection we have started with the Member States on what are the weaknesses in public procurement markets and procedures, how public procurement can boost the competitiveness of European companies by procuring more strategically, greener and more innovative. And finally, what is the right framework for public procurement going forward? As concrete measures, we have put in place strategic procurement dialogues with Member States, where we visit each capital for direct discussions with the responsible authorities. We have also created a public procurement buyers platform with communities that share collective intelligence and exchange best practices. We have support under the technical support instrument, our EU program to help EU member states design and implement reforms, also in the public procurement area. And we have introduced e-forms to be used to publish notices on the tenders electronic daily, and a public procurement data space to improve the completeness and the quality of data. And finally, we will continue our enforcement of the public procurement directives, and we will discuss with Member States, with the Council and with the European Parliament how to address the problem of fragmentation of the public procurement legislative framework.
Thank you. Would you like to comment on these measures? Maybe Pedro, what do you think about the different measures that have been now presented?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that once more, talking about e-forms and PPDS, it's not going to move the needle. And that's one of the reasons why I think that the existing legal framework is unable to actually lead to any significant changes for procurement. In terms of the Commission engaging with the Member States, I have nothing against that. I'm interested in knowing more about the continuous enforcement of the directives, because one of the things I've observed is once the initial enforcement of the Commission to make sure that the directives will be transposed and transposed correctly, I've seen Member States changing their procurement legislation and national procurement legislation, going very much away from what would be the expected implementation and introducing changes to the legal framework, which in some instances, I'm not entirely sure that they are compatible with the directive. So this may be a situation of a strategic detachment from the existing EU procurement obligations. Having said that, the final comment that that Mert made about the fragmentation of the public procurement legislative framework, it goes in line with what I've been saying, is the more you had complexity in the public procurement, either by not changing the existing directives and adding more stuff elsewhere, as Albert also highlighted correctly, the more fragmentation you're going to have and more difficult it is going to be to actually get everyone to understand what are the rules, understand how they apply, and understand how they can work in practice, both from the public side and also the private side. So I'd like to know more about that, what is going to be done in terms of avoiding the fragmentation of procurement obligations appearing in different sectorial pieces of legislation, for example.
Exactly. Thank you very much. I will turn now again to the debate we were talking before about the agreement by the Commission with the recommendations of the Court of Auditors. We made that question to the European Commission, and then we will also go back to our colleagues from the Court of Auditors to see their points. Our question to the Commission was that when we were reading the response of the Commission to the report, we had the impression that there was a general acceptance of the recommendations, but in fact, they did not agree fully on how to implement those recommendations. So we asked the European Commission to give us their views, and then we turned back to the Court of Auditors for their comments on this. So we play the last video, video number 5.
It is actually not correct that the Commission has rejected an EU-wide action plan in its replies. We have expressly accepted all the recommendations made by the Court, including the possibility to design a specific action plan addressing the concerns raised by the Court. But I think what is important is not the form, but the actions we will take. In this view, it's important to keep in mind that public procurement procedures are still perceived as too complex and bringing excessive administrative burden. And this complexity is linked to growing environmental and social requirements and also depends on the national legal context. What we must avoid is that this leads to higher cost to prepare offers, which in turn may have an impact on the rate of participation in calls for tender and thereby on the competition in the public procurement markets. So the Commission will continue its work to further streamline public procurement through standardizing processes, sharing best practices among authorities, and through professionalization. In conclusion, the challenges are complex. We want to improve competition and at the same time enhance the strategic dimension of public procurement and its implementation in practice. To do this, we need combined actions and we need stronger and broader political ownership at all levels.
Thank you very much. As I said, I would like to hear the voice now of the Court of Auditors.
So I think it's important to stress again from our side that the real impact, the success of this report is that we brought public procurement performance again on the Commission's agenda. Because over the last decade, there was so much attention on compliance with public procurement rules, which is important, of course, but public procurement performance was not in the center of the Commission's interest, neither in the center of the member states' interest. So I think it's an important achievement of this report that we brought it back on the Commission's agenda, and now it will be the next Commission who has to follow up our report and our recommendations. As regards our recommendations, I mean, what do we ask by 2025? We ask the Commission to clarify objectives, to improve the data, to monitor and analyze reasons for limited competition on the basis of this data. On the basis of that, to identify mitigating action, and then to monitor public procurement performance on a continuous basis. So I can't see what's wrong about these recommendations. That's just very basic expectations. How the Commission then implements these recommendations, be it through an action plan, be it through revised legislation, we will see. But first, the job that has to be done is that we understand really in detail and better the different factors that have an impact on competition. There are factors where we won't have influence, but there are factors where the Commission might be able to influence together with the member states. And this is the job to be done. And this is the heart of our recommendations. It's important to stress, and here I fully agree with the professors, that nothing can be done without the cooperation of the member states. It's important for the Commission that the Commission takes the lead, that the Commission identifies and takes action, but together with the member states, and only if they are cooperative, we will see a change in the situation. Thank you.
Another question was aimed at Pedro, saying that the current legal framework is not the right one. What would be the right one?
I think that's the million-dollar question, so to speak. No, any legal framework that you can conceive is going to have trade-offs. It's going to imply trade-offs, things that is going to achieve better than others. My personal preference is to move on from a system of directives to a system of regulations, yes. But how that pans out in practice will depend on, as Albert was saying before, in understanding what are the fundamental issues and problems that you want to achieve and to solve them. So you need to identify the problems and identify potential solutions before you start figuring out what is the best way from a legislative perspective to try and address them. And I don't think we're there yet. And my fear is that once we pass over the term of the current commission and we have a new commission coming in at the end of this year and a new parliament, there's going to be pressure nonetheless to revise the current run of directives. And that is going to be done quickly and under pressure and without taking into account the identification of the problems. Not only the identification of the problems, but also the identification of what might work to actually solve those problems. I would add an extra comment just to cap it off, that what I think it's the real valuable point for me of this report is, as was being said right now, this is a report that brings the performance of procurement into the table and into the discussion, which is fundamental for us to actually not fall into the trap of just going with the flow, that we need to have more strategic objectives into procurement, add more complexity in procurement because we need to achieve more, or we want to achieve more in procurement. That does not come free. And so far, the corner, those that were in the corner fighting for improving the competitive landscape in employee procurement were few and far between. So it's very, very helpful, I would say, to have the European Court of Auditors put the spotlight into these issues.
So thank you very much. Sorry, my connection was interrupted, but I could listen to you. Pedro, is there any other comment on this that you would like to add? No, we are almost reaching the end, and I would like to point that we conducted also a LinkedIn survey, and we were asking how should the EU prioritize improving public procurement. So the responses were almost 50% streamlining the procedures, 32% enhance competition. Some also answer boost small and medium enterprises. Let's reach the conclusion of this discussion with your short comment on what should be the priority now to improve public procurement looking ahead in the future. What should be the first priority? First for Helga and Friedemann, please, and then Pedro and Albert, please.
Thank you. Yes, I just support the outcome of the survey because it fully mirrors what is, for example, included in our recommendation 4. This reduce the administrative burden, promote development of efficient procedures, strengthen administrative capacity, and just make public contracts more attractive. That's exactly what we received on answers by the member states, because we had a questionnaire to all the member states, including all the member states as well. And exactly these are the points where they expect something. That's as well a bit, we had a panel where we discussed with stakeholders the outcome of the report already during the process, and it was mentioned there as well. So I think there is, for me, priority to do something to bring back companies and their interest.
Thank you very much, Helga. Friedemann, do you want to add something, or is we give the word to
to me,
yeah?
yes, Pleasure. To me, it would be important to just say or to just ask that before overloading public procurement procedures with additional expectations, clarify first why there is no competition, why there's only limited competition in public procurement, and what can be done about this, because competition is the condition for value for money, and this is what we want to achieve with public procurement.
Thank you very much.
I leave it there.
Thank you very much. Albert, would you like to intervene now? Or Pedro?
I mean, I think the first thing that needs to be done is put more money in the system. I think that's simple. We need to significantly take seriously the professionalization and retention of skills and ability in the public buyer force. And we also need to put money into creating a proper data infrastructure well beyond what the PPDS is likely to deliver in the next few years. And only then we can start talking about other things. But unless we get these really basics right, nothing's going to really change.
Thank you very much, Albert. Pedro, please.
I will second the comment on the data side, bearing in mind the limitations that database itself has. It's not only enough to get and obtain access to the data, it's what you do with it afterwards. That really makes the difference. But for me, looking at the answers in your LinkedIn survey, I'm a little bit with the Court of Auditors on this one. That fundamental issue is competition. That is a fundamental problem we have. And from then onwards, the solutions should be derived from what can work to solve that problem. And it may be connected with what Albert was saying, or it may be as the response says to your survey about streamlining procedures or helping out SMEs. But that comes after that. First, we need to figure out what we need to do to enhance competition, and then start thinking about how we can develop solutions for it.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we have reached the end of our debate. For sure, 1 hour is not enough to tackle all the different challenges, points of view. We have got the opinion of the Court of Auditors, the Commission, the academia, and there is no one single solution for the broad amount of problems. But for sure, first, we have to see how to enhance competition. Then we will see exactly what would come next. But as Albert said, professionalization of public procurers is a must. And for that, there is a real need for further commitment, putting on more resources on it, also enhancing the exchanges of best practices. So we are very thankful to you for all the ideas, debates. For sure, we did not find the golden solution today, but we might be discussing further on this. We will try on our side to facilitate the means to be able to discuss more on this and to devote more time of it. So thank you to all for being with us. We close today our EIPA in conversation, and we look forward to meeting you again very soon. Thank you to the audience for being with us today, and see you soon. Thanks.